Welcome to SR Studios Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Damien Roos, whose story, 5 Days in May, is featured in the spring 2024 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Damien Roos received his MFA in creative writing from the New School and has recently completed his first novel, Church of the New Light. His work has appeared in such outlets as New South, Gravel, and the Colorado Review. By day, he works in homeless outreach, formerly in New York City and currently in the heart of Appalachia. He lives in Asheville, North Carolina with his wife and 2 pets. Damien, welcome to Inside the Issue.
Hey, Casey, glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about your story. It's a really cool one. So, would you mind maybe starting off by reading a little bit from reading a little bit from 5 Days in May for us?
Not a problem. It made it halfway to the stable when Marcus's son, Pete, asked if he'd ever seen one. The men each clutched a half of the pumpkin they'd cut in the garage, red ponchos swaying through the gray day. Marcus let the question linger. He maintained that it was bullshit, even here, even now. Scanned the thick white haze around them as they drew near to the squat barn. There was the chestnut filly flicking its tail, a mare chewing wet grass. A spotted gelding faded by the heavy air. Marcus saw no large white horse among them, mythical or otherwise. They laid the halves down on a bed of hay in Lolly's end stable. Pete hollered into the fog, clapped 3 times and called out over his own resounding echo. The chestnut filly raised her head. The 2 men listened out for Lolly. Pete shrugged. She's shy with strangers, he said. Anyway, that's about it. The rest of them just eat the oats and hay. The rain fell harder as they swung the iron gate shut. Marcus listened to his son relay the story of Lolly's rescue, the strenuous, not quite legal procurement, bureaucracy battles with U.S. Customs, and a nail-biting transport involving a repurposed circus cage. They hung the ponchos up on hooks in the garage, then made their way to the house. I appreciate you coming to help, Dad, Pete said. Had this vacation booked since the fall. Marcus shrugged. No problem. His own nervousness surprised him. Followed Pete through a dim foyer with a subtle lavender scent, a hint of sprightly basil as they crossed the kitchen. Family photos sat in frames on a bookshelf in the living room. Marcus was surprised to find himself in one, an image where he held his newborn grandson. Was thinner then, he didn't fail to notice. Clean shaven, too. Mom, Pete called out, pausing at the entrance to a hall beyond. Dad's here, we're coming back. Fine, came the reply from the room at the end. Marcus stepped past his son and down the hallway. The room was cool and tidy, dominated by a large bed with high corner posts. Tina lay on it, her right leg propped on a pillow. She watched Marcus enter with a glassy, medicated gaze. Been a while. Yup, Marcus nodded. How's the hip? Replaced, she said. I'm debilitated, Mark. It's not a way I like to be. I'm sure it's not. They studied each other. Tina had cut her hair very short and seemed altogether smaller than Marcus remembered. Her voice a little different than it sounded in the occasional, enduring dream. You meet Lolly, she said. Nope, Pete broke in, moving around to the other side of the bed. You know how Lolly gets with folks she doesn't know. Might be a day or 2 before she shows.
All right, thanks. I like how that opening, introduces, like all good stories, right? Introduces our main players and this, and then in this particular story, this possibly mythical creature, right? I think it's handled really, really well. So can you tell us, give us a summary of this story, and then where this idea came from?
Sure, yeah. So, I would say in summation, 5 Days in May is about a man who refuses to accept a truth that's staring him directly in the face. I'd first envisioned this mythical creature being stabled on a traditional farm, kind of like this juxtaposition of magic and, like, I don't know, rural Americana. And then came the wonder as to who this animal's owner might be and what they might be like. And for whatever reason, I've been interested in exploring points of tension between ex-spouses, and kind of creating a scenario where they're forced back into each other's lives and even kind of made to relive the roles that they used to be in. So what that led to was the basic idea of Tina, the ex-wife, having a hip operation that would take weeks to recover from. And there's a 5-day lapse in her home care, which Marcus, the ex-husband, for reasons not even entirely obvious to him, agrees to help out with. And of course, doing so would mean he would also need to tend to that strange, mysterious animal his wife came into ownership of since their divorce. And as things kind of developed, it came clear to me that this archetypical animal is a manifestation of the truth that Marcus needs to accept about his relationship with Tina in order to move on with his life.
That's a really cool idea. The idea, or that Lolly is this manifestation. That's I like that, because there's a great little bit later in the story when Marcus makes her dinner, and it's like it's not a, he sees it, I think, if I'm reading it correctly, as kind of not a romantic gesture, but a nostalgic, kind of it's his last night there, and he makes this really nice dinner and plays some music that from their wedding, and he tries to engage her in this conversation, and he says something about like the sources. He's been doing his own research, right, about this Lolly possibly being a unicorn, and yeah, that he's unwilling to face the truth. I really like that idea. I think that's kind of that's what makes Lolly's presence in the story more than just kind of quirky mythical thing on the outside, right? It really is symbolic of this character's deeper issues. Yeah. So, what was your process like for writing this story? I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned a little bit how you had, you kind of had these things you wanted to juxtapose, but did the writing of this story, was the process similar to what's typical for you, or was it something different?
Yeah, it was pretty similar. I wrote the first draft. Gosh, it was before COVID, so I think it was like the summer of 2018 that I worked on the first draft of this. And kind of a big thing about me that seems to be different from what a lot of other writers talk about is I actually have to have a first draft I can believe in. So I do. It makes for a slower process for me in many ways, because I do end up kind of polishing parts that I'm going to cut 2 or 3 drafts or 4 or 5 drafts down the line. But it really, I'm not the kind of person who can just kind of churn out that draft, that stereotypical just garbage draft, and here it's time to shape it up and everything. I have to have something I'm excited about, and be able to work from there. That's really what drives things. That being said, though, I am, it's something in growing as a writer, I'm becoming more comfortable with the revision process, and more of a believer in just how much that can do. And this story is a great example of that for me.
Yeah. How is this story? So speaking of like the revision process for you, how did the revision of this story move you that direction?
Well, it's really something, it really comes down to something that in your discussions you and I have had about Marcus's character, that's really kind of it. I already had Tina down from the word go. Her character never really changed that much. His did a lot. And so I don't know if that's something that you want to get into
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
yet.
I'm interested. Because I think so one, I mean, one of the things that I really like about this story, I mean, I like all of it, but one of the things that I was really drawn to was, Marcus he's a difficult, I imagine he was a difficult character to write, and you can talk more about, you know him better than I do, of course, about that, but also like who he is as a character. But one of the things that I think is so great about it is that, he's a guy who is, I think, politically conservative. That's clear, but also kind of conservative, just sort of in a more broad sense of that term. Um, and we find out really quickly in the story that his ex-wife is now married, or at least I think she's married. It's not exactly here, but I think she's married, or at least in a long-term relationship with a woman. So that is something that he is really struggling to understand. But yet, you give him these qualities that I think are really great. Like he's a great cook, which is like neither here nor there, but it's like he has this thing, right? He goes around and he cleans the house in ways that weren't asked of him. Tina actually gets upset for some of the stuff that he does, but I like that he has these qualities that we can't easily peg him as like, oh, he's that guy. And that would have been the easy way out, I think, and it would have been a far lesser story if that were the case. And I'm sure you're aware of that, but I'm interested in what it was like, how you see him as a character, and what it was like writing him.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it kind of to me harkens back to what I think it was Nabokov who had said that crafting his characters is akin to a sculptor kind of digging their chisel in a little deeper with every draft until you have that fully realized form. Um, and that was definitely the case with Marcus. I had actually given him, and it's funny, these things you say about him, these positive traits and everything. I'd given him a lot of credit, a lot more credit. Um, the first few drafts than he really ended up deserving. Um, like a lot of these gestures, like what you said about the cooking and especially like the cleaning of the house that he starts to do, and then there's the point he kind of has this obsession with fixing this picture frame on the
Yeah,
wall.
yeah, that's another great detail. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, these things are actually they come to kind of represent encroachments from him in a way. And he I had taken him to be um just kind of a good old boy. Um and it really turned out that he's actually a reactionary with some really harmful beliefs. And granted, he is reacting from a deep pain in his heart, his heartbreak, which that's real, and that is certainly not something that's certainly something that should be considered with his character. But at the same time, there comes a point in the story that he actually has a choice to accept the truth, and the fact that he's ultimately not willing to do so is on him.
Yeah. I guess I like that the story grants him the opportunity, and allows him to make the choice to take it or not. Yeah, I just like that. I like that he, you know, I mean, we recognize this guy, I think, um, but he's deep enough that they're like, oh, I said I didn't feel like I felt like I understood him better than I might have if I passed this guy in life. He's gentle with the horses. Not that this is an apology for any of his really terrible beliefs. But I don't know. I guess it just makes it's just a testament to the complicated nature of people, right, and characters. And I like that. I like that the story allows that. I think that's handled really well. And similar to that too, stylistically, it comes across a little bit in the first page, the bit that you read, but even more so as the story progresses. The style is, I'm probably not describing it the best, but to me, it's, I called it sort of clipped and very direct. There are a lot of sort of intentional fragments that seem to me to fit Marcus's character really well. But was that something you were conscious of, or is that more like a kind of a style that you're more at home in?
Yeah, that has become a style that I'm more at home in. Um, yeah, clipped is a good way to put it. I mean, terse. I think I really value concision, and I also like a lot of rhythm in the prose, and I feel that I achieve that oftentimes better in my sentences by, as you'd mentioned, like leaving out the subjects. Sometimes you do that, and yeah, it's where do these things come from, right? It's something I'm actually happy to say that it wasn't a terribly conscious choice. It's just one of the ways I've evolved as a writer, and uh, being able to kind of find something in your own work that is like, huh, this is actually kind of different from like
Mhm.
what I ever see any other writer out there do is kind of nice. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and to me, it's interesting to me to hear that it's evolving even beyond this story, because it fits really, really well for this guy, right? I mean, it's he's a to the point, direct guy, sees the world, I think, very black and white, and his nature seems to be very direct, and the style, I think, fits that particularly well. Yeah. Um, were there other even beyond Marcus, were there any other challenges for this story, any craft challenges you faced as you were composing or revising?
Um, yeah, I mean, walking the line with him was a big thing. And also figuring out the actual details of how his relationship with Tina um, fell apart, and what is maybe that one like crucial moment where it happened. Discovering that and being able to incorporate that um, smoothly into the story was pretty challenging. Yeah, and I think I pulled it off, but yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, because like we never, from the reader side of things, they kind of rehash out what seems to be like the fight, the thing that ended their relationship. There was like some sort of argument, a blow up, and he threw a plate of food at her. Um, and but we don't, there's she says, what does Tina say? Something, um, oh, what is it? Something about like, I don't know. I mean, something to the effect of his inability to change, or his inability to see the world the way that she does, or like they argue about different realities, right? Um, and but we never know exactly what that is, which I think is kind of cool, because it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter if it was a matter of her coming to terms with her sexuality, or if it was political stuff or environmental. It doesn't matter, because we recognize in that moment that it's probably all of those things, right? Like his reality is different than hers. But I kind of like that we don't actually know specifically what the point was. It's just this larger arguing over reality. Which feels just so kind of on point, right? With where we've been the last 10 years, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, Casey. It's funny. Really, like briefly on that topic, like another challenge was I had shelved, and this really kind of occurs to me now. I had kind of shelved the story for at least a year because once I really understood who Marcus was and took and allowed him to go in that direction, the story became actually kind of outdated to me. I didn't, and maybe it was because I was kind of in like a New York City bubble around that time or something like that. But I was like, do people even still really think this way. This maybe would have been more relevant in like the early 2000s or something. And no, I actually think that it is perfectly relevant. So yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it does. It just feels, I don't know. It just feels, yeah, I guess another way to think about it is, I guess as a reader, I'm sad for Marcus because, you know, he doesn't seem to be a terrible person. He's just somebody who has, for reasons we don't know exactly, have kind of has fallen into a way of thinking. Um, or and like a lot of men around his age, the world is changing and it makes him uncomfortable, and he, reacts negatively to that change. And that's I don't know, it's just sad, right? I mean, it really is. It's like, man, like I just feel bad for the guy. I kind of hate some of the things too, but that's what I like about the story, is that it allows us to see this guy as complicated and almost tragic, right? Yeah. Um, Um, what about maybe the last question I'll ask too is about how did you um how did you decide on Lolly being this mythical creature? Like where, like what was the you mentioned before earlier when we first started talking about how it was something that came up in the story very early, but I don't know, I'm curious how that came to be. Like why a unicorn? Possibly a unicorn.
Yeah. And I had again, Lolly was the genesis of all of this. And I use the word nebulous to describe my initial ideas because I really had no idea what this animal was. Um, and that I feel like I must have actually gone a couple of drafts in without even quite going in that direction. And yeah, it's funny. Uh, I had a reader, a classmate at the new school, who workshopped this, who's a member of the LGBTQ community, and said that they both loved and hated that Lolly's a unicorn. I guess because it's kind of on the nose, but I think my strategy was to let Lolly be as Lolly was, and there's no point where I actually even call Lolly a
Yeah.
unicorn.
Yeah, definitely. I'm referring to her as unicorn because it may well just be a white horse with a bone deformity in its nose or something. Yeah.
Oh no, you're right though. That's what Lolly is. That's what Lolly ended up being, and yeah, it's kind of interesting that it ended up that way.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think it's the story just there's actually another story in this issue. So when you get your copy, you'll be able to check it out that has, in a totally different way, but has something that's, you know, possibly magical, but completely plausible at the same time. Where I like this story, and it's the mystery, I think, is the sort of the thing that kind of keeps pulling, right? That we don't quite know, and ultimately it ends up not mattering at all, right? Which is really cool. I think that it doesn't really matter. It's about what each of them believes. And the way that, like you said before about how, I mean, in a way, I guess it could be made as a manifestation of these two ways of seeing the world, right? One seeing it as hopeful and possible, and one seeing it as not. Yeah. Um, so what kind of writers were you reading when you first started out? Like what are some writers that are kind of foundational for you?
Starting out, it's not the most original choice, but I mean, I Kafka and Burroughs were the writers that kind of blew the doors off for me, and taught me in like my late teens, early 20s that like writing could be, literature could be like subversive and funny and mind bending and cool, you know. So those were very formative writers for me, especially early on.
Do you is your other work occupy this kind of space where it's, again, kind of quasi strange?
Yes.
It does? Okay, cool. Yeah,
Mhm.
that makes sense that Kafka would be an influence then, right? uh,
Yeah, it's funny because I wouldn't say my work's really, it's yeah, Kafka maybe a little bit, but like William Burroughs, it's funny. I like, yeah, his stuff is so vastly different from mine.
mhm,
But yeah, he's one of the first to inspire me. So
cool. Um, what about writers? Any unsung writers or writers that you think people we should be reading more beyond? I think Kafka. Kafka, I think, is probably more well read than Burroughs. I would think more widely read. I mean, sorry, more widely read than Burroughs. I would guess, but I could be wrong about that.
yeah, I would say that's probably true. But yeah, gosh, yeah, they're both, they've both been read and spoken a lot about. I would say two writers that come to mind that I never hear about in discussions with any of my writer friends or any of classmates I've had in school or anything. Amelia Gray is one of them, and Salvatore Scabona is another. They're contemporary and both doing great work. Scabona's debut novel, The End, was a National Book Award nominee. Um, but yeah, I think that they're both terrific and should get more attention. I've also lately been reading a lot more indie press stuff. Um, and I think Kern Punk Press and Whiskey Tit are two really fantastic indie presses that put out great work. So shout
Oh,
out to them.
yeah. What was the first one?
Kern Punked with a K, the Kern Punked.
Yeah. Um, Another one that I think is consistently good is $2 Radio. That's another one that I think is like consistently, you know, like they put out books, like they do their thing and they do it really well. They're not trying to be anything except the thing that they are, which I think is really cool. Um,
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Amelia Gray, she wrote, was it Gut Shot? Was that her debut?
it was. Yep, that's exactly right.
I don't
Yes.
think I've read it, but I remember that collection. It was a collection, correct? Not a novel?
It was a collection. That's right. Of short stories. Yes.
Thought so. Okay. Yeah, I remember it coming up like, is she compared to oh what's that other I should have doesn't Gray do kind of weird body horror stuff? Is that okay? All right. I'm making sure I'm thinking of the right book. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and she was able to take a lot of that stuff that had been kind of considered like bizarro fiction, and a lot of elements from that, and actually make like a commercially viable like
Mhm.
mainstream. I wouldn't really consider her work that mainstream, but she's able to like make it really digestible. No pun intended.
Yeah.
I think she has a biographical novel on the dancer Isadora Duncan, that's just fantastic. And likewise, I should say, yeah, with in the case of Scabona, he had a short story in a public space in, I think it was like 2008, called "The Woman Who Lived in the House." That is my favorite short story of all time. You talk about works that you kind of keep returning back to, and that's definitely one there.
Woman who lived in a house.
"The Woman Who Lived in the House." Yes.
Cool. I'm taking notes. I've been asking
Yeah.
question. I've been asking this question to people, and I'm like taking notes because there's writers that I'm, to put on my add to the never-ending to be read pile, right? All right. Well, yeah, great. What last question here. What are you working on, if you don't mind talking about it, or I guess what you're working on, or if you want to talk about your recently completed novel.
Yeah, it's I'm in a strange place. So yeah, I've got a recently completed novel, Church of the New Light, which is about an ex-convict and his son who find a strange ball of light in the stream behind their trailer. And essentially the father wants to take this oddity and make a quick buck off of it, while his son, who's developmentally disabled and fervently religious, sees it as a sign from God and wants to use it to start a church and use this item as basically a holy relic. So I've got that, and a collection of short stories that is almost complete, and also another novel that I had been working on while doing my MFA that is probably a couple of drafts away, but
All right, man.
busy.
Well, that's good, man. I mean, I think that's the way to do it. To I think I know I made this mistake and not having another project like already in the works. Because there's this sort of dead time after a book comes out, especially a small press collection like mine comes out, that there's very much a dead time to not have something to like dive right back into. I think it's really smart to have, you know, work deep in progress while you're shopping the completed manuscripts around.
Mhm.
Well, that's great. I'm looking forward to the novel sound that the Church of the New Eye. That sounds really cool. I'm looking forward to that finding its way to readers. Okay, well, you can find 5 Days in May, Damien's story, in the spring 2024 issue of SIR. You can go to usi.edu/SIR to find out how to get a copy. And I'll have the link in the description below as well. And thank you again, Damien, for joining us. Really appreciate it. It was great hearing you talk about the story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. I appreciate it.
All right, well, we'll see everybody on the next one. Thanks.